Polls have been a fundamental part of old school RuneScape since the game's inception in 2013. Polls are the first line of defense that players have to protect the game they love from content that they feel doesn't fit in the game, or simply vote out content which would make other players happy. Look, I'm not going to discuss why players vote the way they do in polls, but in this video we are going to talk about 10 massive changes that were polled but never saw the light of day. So sit back, relax, crack open a cold one, and let's get to it. Before we jump into this list, I wanted to give a brief background on polls in old school RuneScape. In the past, polls needed a supermajority of 75% yes in order to pass. However, this was recently changed by Jagex in 2022 to only require a 70% yes rate to pass. Some of the items in this list are pretty old, so there are updates which may not have passed this threshold previously, but can currently pass now. However, at the time of their poll, they didn't pass and thus are viable for addition to this list. So now that that's out of the way, let's get to our first item, the Super Prayer Potion. In 2013, Jagex polled adding an ingredient to the Nightmare Zone's reward shop to update the Prayer Potion to a Super Prayer Potion. This would require 94 herb lore and increase prayer restoration by 4 more points. Finally, it would be able to boost prayer above your base level, similar to the special attack that the Ancient Mace does on a combat dummy in your player-owned house. The poll failed with only 68.9% of players voting yes. And fun fact, Jagex actually repolled the Super Prayer Potion in 2018 with the introduction of the Theater of Blood. This time it would restore 7 plus 25% of the player's prayer points, the same as a normal prayer potion, while also restoring an additional 6 prayer points over the course of 30 seconds. Unfortunately, this Super Prayer Potion poll once again failed. This is an interesting item to fail, and I think there are really 2 schools of thought for why it failed. Either players may have thought the extra prayer regeneration was too powerful, or players were underwhelmed by the potion and wanted to hold out for a while for Jagex to buff it in a future poll. I think this is the more likely scenario considering its base was a vial of blood costing a whopping 17k at the time of this video, not including the 5k Renar herb that the potion also required. This means it cost 22k for a potion which only restored an additional 6 prayer points and didn't even restore them instantly. It would have been cheaper and more effective just to sip a second dose if you needed prayer that badly. The next item on our list is the Fighter Legs. These legs would have been available from Barbarian Assault and would be similar to the Fighter Torso. However, unlike the Fighter Torso, they would only give a +1 strength bonus. This is still less than the Bandos Tassets, but would absolutely compete with the Obsidian Legs. Currently, Obsidian Legs sit at around 825k and are a solid upgrade over Rune or Dragon Plate Legs due to their small strength bonus. Early game players who can't afford Obsidian Legs could opt to get the Fighter Legs for free at Barbarian Assault. It's hard to say why this item didn't pass the poll at 71.5% yes, but it seems like people wanted to simply preserve Obsidian's place in the game, and this could realistically make it obsolete for a lot of players. The next item on our list is the introduction of Ancient Warriors equipment. This was proposed in a blog from Jagex in 2017, along with the Revenant Caves and the Chaos Altar. If you played RS2 or RS3, you'll know that Ancient Warriors equipment was some seriously powerful PvP armor and weapons. Although only the armor was pulled for OSRS, it still got denied, with players raising issues that its degradation mechanics and downsides within PvP combat. Players would have to pay a hefty fee to wear the armor, which also would make the armor untradeable. The Ancient Warriors equipment was pulled so that it would only last for a single hour of combat before vanishing into thin air. Of course, players brought up the idea of switching to the armor for 1 tick to do a special attack before reverting to standard non-degradable PvP armor, thus making the armor last far longer than it was intended. Ultimately, Statius, Vesta, Zuriel, and Morrigan's armor sets never made it past the poll, and to this day still sit in a cold, dark, and forgotten archive, lost somewhere beneath Jagex's headquarters. The next item that didn't pass a poll isn't really an item at all, but rather a quality of life upgrade. After After completion of the Fremnik Elite Diaries, you could pay Ask Aladdin 500k to unlock a much faster way to access the Dagonoth Kings from the top of the mountain. If you've ever done the clue step with Ask Aladdin, you'll know right where I'm talking about. I really like this idea and would have most certainly voted yes to it if I had been playing at the time, because it still requires the pet rock and rune throwing axe to get, but you avoid that horrific run through the rock lobsters, Dagonoths, and Mollusci on your way to the Kings. The atrocious run to the Kings is compounded by the fact that if you die to the Kings, you need to run all the way back with a new pet rock, rune throwing axe, stamina potion, just to loot your stuff while being attacked by the Kings at the same time. It's pretty much asking to die twice in my opinion. I learned this lesson the hard way by paying 8 mil to get my stuff back from Death's Coffer before I knew that it was much cheaper to get it from your gravestone. Needless to say, I really like the idea of putting a closer DK's entrance locked behind the Elite Diary requirements, but the noted DK bones are pretty great as well, which might be part of the reason why this quality of life upgrade never really passed the polls. What do you think about a faster DK run? Should it be repolled? Let me know down in the comments section below. The next update that never passed the polls deals with Vedion. If you've never killed Vedion before the recent Wilderness boss update, you should be grateful. He hits like a truck, was a bit tricky to safe spot, and if you didn't attack tick perfect moving after every 2 hits, his safe spot would break, making you reset everything. On top of this, he summons 2 Hellhounds which need to be killed before transitioning to a second phase, where he needs to be re-killed all over again. Needless to say, kills took a while, and it was very likely that you'd be interrupted by PKers on a regular basis. A poll launched in 2015, which would have made Vedion spawn just a single Hellhound instead of 2. A follow-up poll also proposed reducing Vedion's hit points by 20% and drastically reducing the defense of his Hellhounds. The first poll failed with an atrocious 57%, and the second poll failed with a close 73.7%. I guess players just thought Vedion's difficulty and kill times were fine, considering he dropped not only the Dragon Pickaxe, but the Ring of the Gods as well. This makes sense since the Ring of the Gods is by far the most useful of the 3 Wilderness boss rings, giving a +8 prayer bonus when imbued at the Nightmare Zone. This is likely to be a controversial topic, but next on the list we have Loot Share and Shard Share. Each sharing system was polled separately, and they both failed. Shard Share is a system which allows large drops from bosses to be instantly shared throughout a team by splitting them into shards. For instance, if Bandos Tassets dropped to a group of 3 players and it was comprised of 300 shards, then each player would be distributed in even 100 shards. Shards would be tradable on the GE, meaning each player would automatically be given his or her split, thus preventing item scamming. In theory, this sounds like a great system, but it certainly has its downsides. Foremost, no one in the group actually gets the item that was dropped. For group Ironman, this would be a huge issue because depending on their group size, they may have to get the same drop multiple times in order to acquire enough shards to recreate the item. Can you imagine having to get 3 T-bow drops in order to actually create or craft a T-bow? The second issue with the shard share is that no one would buy the shards on the GE to recreate the item unless the shards themselves were worth less than the item itself. Thus, by getting shards, you're really being paid less than your share of the actual item itself. The other poll change was Loot Share. Loot Share is different from Shard Share because someone in the team still gets the full drop. The others would be rewarded in loot points based off of some fraction of the drop's GE value. Loot points would be factored into the next boss's unique drop so that players with more loot points would be more likely to receive the next unique. When players get a unique in their name, their loot points are mostly depleted based on that unique's value. It almost feels like being paid in RNG, which is kind of weird to think about. Essentially, Loot Share is all about being paid what you're owed and boils down to you need to continue to kill the boss in order to reap the return on your investment, i.e. loot points. Loot Share offers a way to avoid trust being a factor altogether, relying on the Loot Share points to distribute loot fairly over time, rather than relying on your team to split each individual drop. For a lot of players, this concept didn't really strike the mark because of its ability to be abused. Players could pump up their loot share and then join a clan to have a high chance at swiping a coveted item from a boss they don't have the gear, skill, or capability to solo. Imagine being mostly carried in the Tombs of a Masket, disguised as a learner, and swiping a shadow from your new clanmates. That's pretty dirty. At least we know now that if you get spooned a shadow, you just got lucky and weren't trying to abuse the system. I wonder if RuneScape could implement a loot sharing system based on the blockchain and decentralization, where external peers could validate that a split was properly distributed and incentivized by some small stake in the split itself. It's an interesting theory to think about since we already implement a basic peer reviewing system within RuneWatch where scammers get added to a naughty list for scamming items. Okay, our next item is the Vampiric Vambraces. These Vambraces were pulled along with the Theater of Blood as the new best in slot range gloves at the time. They boasted a plus 14 range accuracy bonus and a plus 2 range strength. This item shockingly failed by 0.1% with a 74.9% yes vote. I suppose people were just not ready to give up Barrow's gloves, or perhaps felt like the Theater of Blood already offered too many overpowered uniques like the Scythe, Rapier, and Sanguinesti Staff. I suppose that ultimately it was a good decision not to add the Vambraces into the game because just a few years later, Next released an old school RuneScape and drops the Zerite Vambraces, which give an additional plus 4 range accuracy bonus over the Vampirium Vambraces. This is one instance where actually holding out on saying yes to a poll ended up with Jagex actually creating a more buffed item in the future. I wonder if there's other items that we could do this for. The next items which were pulled and failed were the Elder, Twisted, and Kodai armor sets. These sets were intended to be best in slot degradable armor, which all came from the Chambers of Xeric, RuneScape's first raid. I for one am glad these items didn't pass the poll. I feel like best in slot armors for all 3 combat styles shouldn't come from one raid, boss, or minigame exclusively. I touched briefly on this in another one of my videos, but I feel like one of RuneScape's strongest selling points is its variety of ways to train skills and acquire items. If all 3 best in slot armors drop from the same content, it could end up pigeonholing or forcing all types of accounts into doing that content, even if players didn't enjoy it just because the sheer necessity of the armor itself. Current best in slot melee comes from Next, best in slot range comes from the Tombs of a Masket, and best in slot mage comes from the Chambers of Xeric. This gives varied content players can pursue to acquire some seriously powerful armor and weapons from a variety of sources. The next item on our list is the Totality Potion. The Totality Potion is basically an overload which combines the effects of a super combat, ranging, and magic potion all into one. It was pulled along with the addition of the Theater of Blood. It would have been created using a vial of blood and Tortzel, requiring 96 Herblore to make. I think this just didn't get added to the game because players felt like it would be way too overpowered. Part of the charm and challenge of old school RuneScape is the limited inventory space and having to choose what can fit in your inventory. A potion like this would pretty much make ranged super combat and magic potions obsolete when you had to use 2 or more potions, i.e. anywhere you had to pot for 2 or more combat styles like the Theater of Blood or Zulrah could be condensed down into one potion, thus saving inventory space for more gear switches or food. Our last item that never made it through the polls is the Divine Spirit Shield. The Divine Spirit Shield is an item many of you may remember from RS3 and is a seriously powerful tool. Unlike the Elysian Spirit Shield, the Divine Spirit Shield reduces 30% damage at a 100% success rate while draining prayer points. 6% of the damage dealt is actually drained from your prayer. It was pulled to be dropped from the Corporeal Beasts along with the other sigils, but most players opted to skip out on the Divine because it's too similar to the Elysian Spirit Shield. Players felt that it would be drastically reduce the price of the Ellie without adding much more of a benefit. Others felt like it shouldn't be out of the game because its 100% chance to reduce incoming damage by 30% would be way too powerful in PvP combat, which is certainly understandable. Well, that's all I have for you in this video. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments around some of these items, and if you think they should be repolled in the future or not. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe as it really helps my channel grow. Thank you and have a great day.